Hey, good morning, everybody. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. This is how to realise the potential of Microsoft in legal organisations. We're just going to give everybody a minute to get joined. Right, looks like we've got pretty good numbers. We'll get started to respect everybody's time. I see a lot more people flowing in as well. So first off, going to hand over to Paige.
Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. I know it's early on a Monday morning, so appreciate everyone that's joined so far. So just to run through a quick agenda, so I'll be doing the welcome and introductions. We'll then hand over to Thomas Bosnott, who is our Principal Solutions Architect at Modality. He's also a Microsoft Certified Master and MVP. And he's going to be going through why Microsoft Teams in legal, how to enable secure collaborative working, meetings and telephony, how we can help as part of Modality. We'll then go through and hand over to Alex East, who will be going through any offers that are available around sort of Microsoft Teams Office 365. And then I'll do a wrap up and talk around any sort of funded workshops that you might be eligible for. So just a brief agenda. Tom, if you just want to pop onto the next slide. So just a little bit about Modality Systems for any of those who don't know Modality. We are recognised as being Microsoft's leading Teams partner in the UK. We've got an unrivalled range of capabilities that address collaboration in meetings and callings, as well as the rest of the modern workplace and Office 365 stack. We use our world-class consultancy service and in-house development teams, global 24/7 managed service and support services to deliver a unique, all-encompassing solution focusing on secure by design solutions for Microsoft Teams and the Office 365 stack. And we have a data-driven approach to adoption, security and compliance, which we'll be touching on today. And we just make sure, using all this information, that we're meeting any ROIs that you set out as a business. So legal remains one of our strongest sectors at Modality. We've got a very large number of law firms that we're currently working with, understanding the complexity of their communications and collaboration requirements, and hopefully you'll find today useful with going through all this information. Perfect. Next slide, Tom. So at Modality, and we'll go into this in a bit more detail, we have a large number of solutions that we work with. So we have our software teams. We've got an in-house development team based in Norwich who have created products to really help with the collaboration side of Microsoft Teams, using reports for usage, collaboration and governance, which are really key with the law firms that I'm working with currently. We can help with PSTN billing, diagnostics as well. We've got operational services, so support, managed service. We use all of the information from our reporting to feed into that service with things like service delivery managers, meeting with you monthly to go through how Teams is being used within the organisation. Is there any red flags that need to be addressed? Right the way from usage to the governance and also the service and how it's performing. And then we've got our consultancy service, so really working with you from the beginning of your project. So starting with the planning, making sure that you've got a secure by design platform, and delivering that technology across the business, making sure that it's adopted using our adoption and change management process, and running the entire project right the way from the start to the end, and then the continued operational services moving forward. So it's just a brief background on Modality, but to jump in straight, I'll pass over to Tom and let him sort of jump straight into Teams and how we can help. And if you want to understand any more about Modality, I will be in contact so I can run you through any of that in more detail. So Tom, over to you.
Brilliant, thanks Paige. Yeah, thanks everybody for taking the time. It's first thing on a Monday, but sometimes that's the best slot to be able to get. So we're going to go through what we're hearing from customers in legal organisations, why Teams is starting to accelerate quite rapidly, talk about secure collaborative working. Obviously security is kind of the watchword for anybody in legal, so that's a big conversation. Is it secure? How is it secure? How do we manage it? How do we control it? Jump into meetings and telephony, and all throughout we're talking about how Modality systems can help. So what's native in the box, and then where do we add value, be that software, be that services, or be that consultancy. So first off, why? Well, I mean, it's pretty obvious, isn't it, at the world events at the moment, but remote working and hybrid working is definitely here to stay. So legal is quite a traditional vertical, and we certainly saw when the initial COVID stuff came along, a bit of like, well, we'll wait it out, we'll stay traditional, and obviously as this has got worse and worse and extended, there's now a reality dawning on everybody that remote working is going to be almost the norm for quite a while longer. I think the latest news reports, the vaccine, they were saying like maybe next Christmas things will be normal. So this is not a wait it out type situation. And even as we return to the office and return to work, it's going to be hybrid working. So some people are going to be at home, some people are going to the office. From a client's point of view, that they may not want to be coming into physical meetings. So even if you want to, they may well be online. So how do we get the most out of that experience? Microsoft Teams, of course, offers the collaboration, the online meetings, and telephony. So it's everything in one box, which is very appealing. Most importantly, though, is the security, compliance, governance throughout all of those three, and that's what we'll talk about. So how can we keep Teams governed, compliant, and secure? How can we get the most out of those online meetings? We have lots of people using this technology who maybe traditionally didn't. So how can they work from home and have a good experience? How can you help support and manage them from home? What are the telephony options now? Everybody's remote. How do I have my remote workers have great telephony? And overall, looking at both software and hardware, how do we optimize that work at home experience, particularly for more senior people, for VIPs? How do we give them a great experience? So first off, we're going to go through some of the features that ensure you have secure collaboration. So we're going to talk about everything that's in the box, and a little bit of this depends on where you are license-wise. Do you have Office 365 E3, M365 E3, Office 365 E5, M365 E5? Some of the features change depending on what SKU you're on, and certainly one-to-one we can help with that. By the way, I meant to say, feel free to fling questions in as we go. So we're watching the chat and they'll be brought up. But if we can't answer them live, we'll loop background. So any questions you have, just fire them in as we go on the chat. So we'll talk about governance, compliance, and security. And realistically, they all intertwine and overlap. We generally think about governance as managing data, the containers data stay in, the structures, the labeling, the creation, the deletion, the archiving. All the control tends to be governance. Security is about protecting that data, so ensuring that only the right people have access to it, that we know who has access to it. And compliance is very specifically about meeting specific defined requirements. So you will be compliant to your internal standards or compliant to a legal standard or an external body standard. And you'll be using governance and security to ensure you're compliant. So they're very much interlinked. And importantly, when we talk about Teams, and we get this a lot, it's not really Teams governance and security and compliance, it's Office 365/M365 governance, security and compliance. So this is one of the complexities of Teams, but also one of the benefits. It's so tightly intertwined into Office 365, we get all the benefits of the full tooling of governance, security and compliance across the whole Office 365 stack. But it also means there's a lot of options, a lot of settings, a lot of policies. So we can get really specific in our control, but we have to understand how those things hang together. So first off, security features, and we're not going to go into all of these in great depth, but just to give you a whistle-stop tour. So multi-factor authentication, that's just 101 security. All Office 365 users should be using multi-factor. And there's lots of resistance to multi-factor. If you've used it in the past, it used to be quite clunky. These days, it can be very, very smooth. It's push notifications to your phone. It's face approval and I agree on the phone to sign yourself in. It's remembering what your previous PCs, mobiles and IP addresses are, so it's not prompting you every single time you log in, for example. But that is just a real base level. You've got to have MFA enabled. Of course, your data is encrypted. It's encrypted with TLS and MTLS for media. It's not just the audio, the video that's encrypted, the data is encrypted as well, of course, because we've got files in here that are going into OneDrive and into SharePoint. We've got advanced threat protection, so that's controlling things like data in terms of the files, the OneDrive, viruses, any kind of external threats, all that control. And used a lot in highly compliant scenarios is conditional access. So you are only allowed access from a corporate device, or you're only allowed access from this mobile, or you're only allowed access from this desktop. So we can tightly control who has access. And all of these work together to ensure you've got a secure experience, whether you're in the office or whether you're remote. Moving into compliance. So again, this is not every single feature, but just gives you an idea. You've got information barriers. These can be really useful for blocking internal groups of users from communicating. So if you have any scenarios where you require ethical walls, you're doing legal work for a certain company, and that team can't ever talk to this other team working with this other company, or you've got different cases at different stages, you need to unequivocally prove that those parts of the organization are not talking. Information barriers allow you to block groups of people from being in the same team, from chatting to each other. That's really, really useful. You've got communications compliance. Now, interestingly, this sounds like audio and video, but it's actually more chat-based. So this is looking for keywords, key phrases on internal team communications, looking for insider risk and insider threats, which is a really big topic at the moment. If you look at a lot of the recent breaches and security issues, the majority are actually internal risk rather than external risk. So the old model of having, I've got my firewalls, I've locked everybody out, isn't really a great model anymore. You need to consider that there could be insider risk as well. You've got DLP, data leakage prevention. This is about stopping data getting out too far. And along with that, you've got guest access in Teams that can be controlled. You've got federation that can be controlled. So DLP will consider both those scenarios. Of course, you've got e-discovery and content search, legal hold, very extensive auditing. So you've got the native audit logs, but if you want to take it to the next level, you can push those logs into Azure Sentinel, which is a Splunk-like experience to use another kind of technology, brings all the logs together. You can then index, search, and view. Super, super useful. So if you're serious about proving audit, Azure Sentinel is a great place to look. And then moving on to the audio, video, and sharing, you've got an API to do third-party compliance recording. And in the meetings and calling section, we'll talk more about compliance audio and video recording. So you can see there lots and lots of features to control your compliance. And then moving to the governance, and we'll get into this in a bit more detail, you can control your team creation, you can have naming policies, you can have expiration policies. Critically, you can control the apps that are allowed in Teams, because Teams is essentially a window to lots of other business applications, and you need to control that because you need to understand which applications your users are using. And probably the hottest topic for our legal customers at the moment, guest access. How do we control it? How do we allow it? Do the guests live on our tenant? Do we live on the guest's tenant? We'll talk about our experience there. Okay, just a quick look at the chat to make sure we're not missing anything. No, all good so far. So when you're thinking about teams, you've got to make some decisions about governance. Who can create teams, what your naming policy is going to be, how you're going to classify groups, expiration, the full life cycle, creation, deletion, archiving. And then you've got to consider as well within the team. So when we talk about Microsoft Teams, we talk about the team within Teams. What's the approval process for bringing apps in there, and what's the approval process for bringing guests into that team? And we often see this, like, no decision, like Teams is out there, but we haven't had the workshop yet, we haven't gone through governance. Well, that is a decision. That's a decision to accept the defaults. Very often in more compliant orgs, there are some things you actually need to do beyond the defaults. Just because you bought E5 doesn't mean all these things are just working automatically. You do need to configure them. So if you're using Teams, you absolutely need to understand what's your answer to each of these bullet points. So first off, the creation process. So this is always the first topic and fear. Everybody's worried about teams sprawling out of control. And it's a valid concern, particularly when you look at things like GDPR, where you need to know where your data is. You need to be able to discover it. If a client says they want all the data you've got on them, for example, you need to know where that is and what your policy is around that. So it is very, very important. But controlling creation is not managing sprawl completely. It's just the start of the journey. So yes, you should control creation. Yes, you can natively disable creation, but bear in mind you're also disabling the creation of Office 365 groups against other products like Outlook, Power BI, SharePoint, Yammer. So it's quite extreme to disable creation without having some process in place. You can restrict creation to select users, and you can control to an extent with labeling whether you have public teams, which means anybody in the org can join at any time, private, where an owner has to admit and remove people, and org-wide, where it's just everybody in one giant team. Within private, you can also have discoverable teams, so the name is visible to other people who are not members, and non-discoverable teams where even the name isn't visible. As you can see, lots of options there. Generally speaking, our customers tend to lean towards private teams because there is control over who gets admitted to those teams. So the owner of those teams then takes some accountability for the membership of them. Public means anybody can join or leave at any time. And in compliance settings, that doesn't tend to be the best thing because there's no real control there over who jumps in, who jumps out. And also from a guest point of view, private is always a strong recommendation because you've now got external parties in that team. So you want anybody being admitted to that team to be aware this is not just within the org, this is also external. In Teams, very recently, last couple of months, you do have native team templates. So you can give users options at creation to say what type of team they would like to create. They are global, so everybody can see the templates, everybody sees every template, but they can be quite useful as a basic step to give users a good first experience of team. So setting up how they want channels, what apps they want in the team, all ready to go for them. Naming policy. So again, this is group naming policy. It affects the whole of Office 365, not just Teams. If you've got Azure AD Premium, you can do naming policy where you have a certain suffix or a certain prefix. You can also block certain words. So you might want to block finance, CEO, HR. You won't want any misinterpretation of Teams names. It's useful, it's fairly one size fits all. I really dislike suffixes because from a Teams mobile experience, you end up with a a name at the front or a prefix at the front of the team name, so half the mobile screen is the suffix. So if you're going to do this, I'd really recommend prefixes, if anything. But think about user experience here. So if you're just adding lots and lots to the team name to make IT management easier, there's lots of better ways to do that. We do see people get a bit carried away with naming conventions and add lots of like the location, the team creator, and there are better ways to manage that than essentially ruining the team name to make IT's life a bit easier. But blocked words can be useful. So we've now talked about creation, we've talked about the name. One of the key things is this labeling. So ensuring that your container or your team is labeled correctly. You can use sensitivity labels to do this. You can do this at creation. You can also tie policies to labeling. So you can control, for example, guests aren't allowed in this team because this team has a certain label. Or if you see the example on the screen, this team is confidential, therefore it will only allow me to create a private team. So worth digging into labels. Is a big topic, but absolutely you should be using labels to control some of your groups and what they can do and what they can't do, and how you go on to manage the life cycle of those groups. And coming to the end of the life cycle with the native tooling expiration policy. So you can set up teams or groups by extension to auto expire and delete or force the owners to renew them. This works based on looking at the activity of the team or group, so file activity, chat activity, that kind of thing. Microsoft use 180 days as their default, as an example. It's worth understanding that if nobody renews that team, it goes into soft delete for 30 days and then it's gone forever if you don't back it up in another way. So if you are going to use this, ensure that the business has signed off on this is the process, and if the owners don't pay any attention to those notifications, that data will be gone unless you have some other method to control it. When you're deleting or archiving teams, so delete means you've got 30 days in the Office 365 recycle bin before they're gone. Archive is interesting. It makes the team read-only but still accessible. So it's useful in the sense of it kind of gives a signal to users that this team is no longer active, but we still need the data. But we do see some customers kind of using it as an easy way to get around Lifecycle and not deleting, and that doesn't really work, particularly in legal, where you don't want to be holding on to data longer than you need to. So archive can be useful, but I wouldn't say it's used extensively, or I wouldn't use it extensively, because it leaves all those teams available in search and around. Maybe it's a pre-delete process, but if you have long-term archival needs, I wouldn't necessarily look at that feature. I would look at pulling that data off and storing it, or maybe moving that team to only having one admin owner and making it non-discoverable, which essentially makes it hidden to the users, but it's still around. So a few options to talk through there, but again, most importantly, understand them, have a policy and procedure. So now within the team, you will have apps, and you can have org-wide policies. You can also go down to team level or user level policies, and you can allow or block specific apps. In legal, this is pretty easy. I would start off with blocking everything and work backwards as to what you approve. By default, you will have all third-party apps available, so the users can get to Trello or Dropbox or whatever they want to through Teams. That's potentially quite tricky for legal in terms of compliance and discovery. So I would turn off third-party apps and then look to selectively approve the apps you want to approve. And you can do this with app permission policies. So you can have a different policy for different types of people. So you might have one policy for IT, another policy for end users. You might have different types of end users, but think carefully about what you're approving, and also think carefully about how many of these policies you have, because it's super confusing to end users if some people can get this thing and other people can't. They won't know necessarily is because you're in this group or you're in that group or you're in this country or you're in that country. Try and keep it as uniform as you can. Now on to probably the hottest topic after creation, guest access. So guest access is allowing users, other Office 365 users from outside your tenant, your organization, to come in and join the team. So you control this for your teams. You don't control it for other tenants and their teams. This is different to federation, whereby you can chat with another person or call another person externally. This is them coming into the team, being able to access the files, access the content. It's really, really beneficial in the sense of it's a safe, controlled, audited place to collaborate. So rather than emailing files, having lots and lots of versions, you can have one store, one place, all multi-factored, all audited, all logged. You can control which domains are allowed. You can control who is allowed to invite guests in the first place with the guest inviter role. This is something that needs to be managed quite carefully, and you need a policy and procedure around. You need to know, what are we allowing, how long are we allowing guests for, which are the organizations we want to bring into our team. So you can do this at the kind of user permission level, so only allowing certain people to invite. You can have an IT whitelist of approved domains, allow deny list. So we've pre-approved these orgs we work with, and we've all signed joint NDAs, etc. We're happy to work together. And you can then control it at the group or team level. So this organization is allowed, they're on the allow list. This is a manager who's allowed to invite guests, and this particular team is labeled appropriately so that it has guests allowed in that team. And there'll certainly be teams you don't want to allow guests into. So all three of these levels will apply for your organization. Some recommendations around guests. Yeah, it won't be appropriate to have them in every team. By default, if you enable guests at the org level, they're enabled at each group level. So you'll want to go around and disable that potentially either on team creation or with some kind of script afterwards. There are tools and controls to manage and report on guest access. We'll talk about the Modality tool in a minute. Don't just completely disable it, because your users will just find another way to group share, probably on a third-party product that's less compliant. So think about how you can work with the org. And also, if you completely disable it, you'll probably find your competitors or your customers may enable it, in which case all the work will go on their tenant and you lose some visibility there. So it's better to be enabling it with some control around it. And an interesting topic that came up, again, seems to be hot in legal at the moment, is how do I deal with this? So tenant switching can be tricky for the guest. Do I have my users who I can train join the guest's team, in which case all the data stays on their tenant? Or do I have the guests come to my tenant, in which case I have the control? All things being even, my recommendation would be you bring the guests onto your tenant. That way you have maximum control, maximum visibility, the complete audit log. You control when they join, you can control when they leave. If you let your end users go out and be the guests, you lose a lot of that visibility and control. So it's going to happen one way or the other. You might as well embrace the fact that you're the more progressive org, that you have all your ducks in a row as far as audit logs, compliance, control, policy, procedure. And I think you look like the better organization if you say, here's our approach, here's how we deal with your data, here's why we store it in teams, here's what we do. I think that's the strongest approach. So generally, I would say you'd be better being the org saying, this is how we do it, this is how you join, this is how you come into our teams. Love questions or feedback on that. If there's any questions, feel free to throw them in. But that does seem to be sort of the #1 topic at the moment is, yeah, we're going to enable guest access, but do we actively bring people in? How do we control their stay in teams, that kind of thing? So everything to this point has been native tooling, all in the box, depending on what license level you've got. Now going to go into a little bit about what Modality systems add beyond what's in the box. So we have a product called Teamwork Analytics, and Teamwork Analytics is an Azure-based application lives in your Office 365 tenant, or it can be run by Modality systems in Azure. Typically in legal, it would go in your tenant, so you have complete control of it in terms of data and compliance. And what it's doing is it's putting lots of information out of Teams using Microsoft Graph. It can control team creation, it can control lifecycle of teams with Azure automation, and it has lots of reporting around usage and around governance. So this is used to overlay onto Teams to give you an idea of who's using Teams, how's it being used, but also to control the life cycle from creation to life to eventual removal, archive, deletion of Teams, and to have visibility all along the way. So first off, lifecycle. So I talked about native team creation. You can enable some users to create teams and others not. You can have some native templates, in which case everybody gets the templates. Create Team is an app that lives in Teams by Modality that more tightly controls the creation process. So you can control who can create which type of teams. You can have role-based access control to certain types of templates. There's traffic light guidance for you're allowed to use this name, but not that name. You need to have a description of this length. Lots and lots of detail. There's approval process, so you can have two-step approval. For example, if someone asks for guests, you can have IT or compliance approve that team before it happens. You can set retention periods on the team. You can check for duplicate names. So just adding another level of policy and control around creation, and it can give a much more granular process depending on who the user is. So maybe some users are just allowed to create teams of guests, and other users require two-step approval for guests. So that's how we deal with the problem of granular control of creation. During the life cycle of the team, the use of the team, we have automation that's continually checking the team to make sure it's in line with the policies and procedures we've set. So a common one is minimum number of owners. We like to have 2 owners of a team. We always want teams with guests to be private. We want to check that teams are active for chat, active for files. And any time any team is falling outside of those guardrails, we can send an email or a direct Teams message to the owners of those teams, because the owners are responsible and accountable for those teams. Say, hey, your team hasn't been used in 45 days. Per our policy, this team now needs archiving. This team will be deleted. This team needs to be deleted after X days, that kind of thing. You can control the policies, you can control the text, so you can align this exactly to what your policies and procedures are. And the idea here is that automation takes a lot of the burden away so that you can control exactly how things work, leave this running day to day, and only deal with the exceptions. And then last is the governance reporting. So this is looking at Power BI reports that have the current status of the teams. Are they active? Are they in line with our policies and procedures? Are they private, public, hidden, owned, labeled, etc.? What this is doing is giving a visibility, again, typically to service owners, compliance, anybody internal audit, that kind of thing, who wants to see a clear view of the current state of the Microsoft Teams estate. That there are native reports in Microsoft Teams, but there's nothing kind of aimed specifically at the governance user to say, here's all the information you need in one place, you can filter it, slice and dice it. So creation, automation, and reporting. This is a little deeper dive on creation. The key takeaway here is we are native to Teams. So it's a Teams app, it lives in the sidebar here, it runs within Teams. So you're not sending people off to ServiceNow or any other website to create their teams. They do stay within Teams, which is really important to us. Here's some examples of the automation. So there's these scenarios that are typical defaults: minimum 2 team owners, remind owners they've got guests. This can be really, really useful actually if your policy is owners are accountable and responsible for the guests they bring into Teams. Then you're reminding them on a regular basis, maybe every quarter, hey, you've got X, Y, and Z UPNs in your team. Per our policy, you're responsible for them. Do you still need them in? Do you want to take them out? Inactivity, tidying up those teams that are no longer active. And one that came directly from customers actually is deleted teams notification. So any owner can delete a team at any time. You typically have multiple owners. It's very easy for someone to delete the team, for the others, owners and or members not to be aware. You've only got 30 days in the Office 365 recycle bin and that is gone. So this just pings a message saying, hey, this team you're an owner of has been deleted. You've now got, let's say, 20 days to give ourselves a 10-day buffer. You've got 20 days to contact IT or that is gone. Those are just example automations. What it's really doing essentially is doing a SQL query based on data and sending a message. So it's a very flexible engine, and if there's a way we can come up with a rule to meet your requirement, then you can send a message. So it can be targeted at only certain users, only certain teams of certain members, certain departments. You can get very granular if you want to. And here's a look at the governance reports in a bit more detail. All Power BI driven, all lives on your tenant, so it doesn't have to be Modality have any access to this whatsoever, which is very important. And you can drill down by a user. You can see guest and the guest domain. This is typically used heavily for guest control, knowing who's in which team, how long they've been there, are they active, that kind of thing. Very, very useful to give a easy view of what's going on in the environment without having to dig in, say, PowerShell or any of the native reporting. And not really for this webinar, but we also have very detailed usage reporting. So we can go into who's using Teams, what functionality are they using, are they using chat, are they using collaboration, are they using meetings? And we can dive right into who's replying to who, who's active, who's actually collaborating with who. So we use this to align to your plan for change, digital transformation, adoption, to get beyond we use Teams for meetings to are we getting the most out of Microsoft Teams? Are people collaborating the way we want them to? There's a whole webinar on that, but just wanted to flash it up to kind of give you an idea of there's the usage element and the lifecycle management element. Okay, so that was all kind of collaboration, text-based, file-based, chat-based collaboration. But of course, meetings and telephony are really hot topics. If you've got E5 or M365 E5, you've already got dialing conferencing, you've already got phone system, you're really close there. You just need to add calling plans or direct routing to add telephony experiences there. If you've got O365 E3, M365 E3, there are add-ons and offers, and Alex towards the end is going to talk about the offers. There is compliant session recording, there's new meetings experiences, which have been a hot topic around touchless meeting join, mobile control, that kind of thing. You might want to interrupt with your existing room systems, we'll talk about that. And I'm going to finish off on some hardware for the home user. So you've got important users at home, how do we give them a great experience? So first off, compliance call recording or session recording, I should say, because it's video, chat, screen share, everything. This is completely possible, don't need to be in the office, can be remote, all works the same, mobile client, iPad client, IP phones, desktop client, web client. It's recorded service side, so it doesn't matter what the client is. You can control who's recorded, what scenarios are recorded. There's a number of third-party vendors. We tend to use Variant. Critically, something Modality can do that's quite interesting is we can deploy Variant for you on your tenant. So we provide a managed service wrap, we control it, install it, patch it, manage it. We can control that from Modality, but on your tenant, all role-based access control, all extensively logged with Sentinel, uses a technology called Azure Lighthouse. The key thing there is you get compliance recording on your tenant, your data completely locked down. We manage it as a service, but it's not SaaS. So you can control where it goes in Azure, what region it's in, audit control, all that kind of thing. But very, very possible, very, very scalable. And something we've seen a lot of people have traditional recorders on IP phones in the office. That's no longer viable. This provides a remote working compliance recording scenario. In terms of room systems and existing rooms, of course, Microsoft Webinar, you've got the option to swap out your rooms for Microsoft Teams rooms. This is becoming interesting at the moment because they have a mobile controlled experience coming. So you can control the room from your mobile Teams client, meaning you don't have to touch system. There's also some voice control coming, although it's US first. and that spiked a lot of interest in these room systems, because suddenly it's not just about swapping a video system for a video system. You've got all the benefits of it being a Teams endpoint. You can also join WebEx and Zoom meetings from here and Skype meetings, but it's really the touchless join experience that's been driving a conversation. And just to kind of dispel any myths about quality or scaling or experience, you can add third-party audio video amps here, ceiling tile mics, high-end cameras, high-end desk mics. So in legal, it tends to be the experience has to be just so. It's not just a Windows PC and a USB speaker. You can get very high-end with the audio video in these systems as well. If you've got existing room systems, you've got Cisco, you've got Poly rooms, you've got life-size rooms, there are what are called cloud video interop providers that provide a certified way to connect the two worlds, the standards-based room and the Teams room. And again, this has been a hot topic in hybrid working, because we've got all these room systems, they're done to a very high standard, they're very high end, but now some of the people are working from home on Teams. How do I have a select number of people in the office, socially distanced and very carefully, and have other people working at home? So that is where cloud video interop comes. All the options there on the slide. Modality specifically run PEXIP, and we run PEXIP in Azure. So we have a service called One Meeting where we run PEXIP, and that provides cloud video interop. And in terms of these providers, they're all very similar at a base level. What is slightly different about One Meeting is that we can also do endpoint registration. So we can have your standards-based rooms register to PEXIP in Azure. This is becoming more common as people move away from legacy meeting room systems. They don't want to pay for another control system within their environment. They can just outsource the room registration to the cloud. We also have a video managed service team that can do wider management, patching, control of standards-based rooms, as well as Microsoft Teams rooms. And of course, lots of reporting. We're very big on reporting, so quality, usage, etc., etc. Okay, so we've gone through some of the meeting room experience. The last thing I'm going to go through here is ensuring a good home working experience. This was a tip from one of our customers about things that would be relevant for legal. Lots of people now working from home, not necessarily always the most tech savvy in the world. So how do we give them a really good experience at home? So of course you've got your traditional headset scenario. The main takeaway here would be DECT is going to be much better than Bluetooth. If they've got DECT and they can walk around a decent distance in their environment, they're going to appreciate that experience better. Wired is your fail-safe for minimum risk in terms of any wireless interference, but DECT is generally pretty good. Bluetooth I would steer away from because of the 2.4 gigahertz potential issues, and also people tend to not understand the signal range of Bluetooth, so they move away from their machines. You can go personal speakerphone, so there's lots to talk about headset fatigue. These can provide a good experience. If anybody's using PC mic and speakers in their environment, you're going to have echo and noise and a bad experience. These are very cost effective, plonk them on desk, USB in, and can offer a good experience. If you have people who have headsets who still don't use them, this could be a good middle ground. Headset's always going to be better quality than a speakerphone, all things being even, but these allow you to not be on a headset all day and still have a decent audio video experience. You have laptop cameras, but if you invest in a more expensive kind of decent webcam, it doesn't have to be megabucks, that can be $100, $150. You'll get a much better video experience in terms of the quality of the light intake and experience. If you're going on to important remote meetings, it's worth spending a bit of time making sure the camera and lighting is right for those people so they have a good perception on the remote end. Going higher end and more risk-proof still, you can have proper IP phones that are standalone devices that don't run on USB connected at home. So there's no special VPNs needed or any special technology. You can just plug these in at home and they register to the cloud exactly like a machine would. You can run them on PoE, so you have a little power over Ethernet switch. Very cheap, very easy, or you can get traditional plug-in power sockets as well. These can be handy if people are heavy traditional phone users, they're not going to use loads of video, they struggle with getting their laptop booted on time or their Wi-Fi connectivity. This can just be a known good scenario for them. And that covers your audio, but you can also have standalone dedicated Android-based devices for video and sharing as well. So Microsoft Teams displays coming in at a few £100. Think of them like an Echo Show type scenario, but they are dedicated to Teams, they're running Microsoft Teams, and they have video and desktop sharing as well. So again, a known good quantity, doesn't get affected by Windows patching, doesn't take any time to boot up, always on. That can be really useful for people who struggle with getting their laptop online. And if you want to go really high end, there are Microsoft Teams rooms for Android. Bit of a mouthful, but these are originally targeted at huddle spaces, but now being more and more put in home office, solo office type scenarios. So these are typically mounted on a monitor and they're standalone one-use devices. They are a room system, but they can sit in a home office just always on, ready to go. Can be Wi-Fi, can be Ethernet, have built-in mic and speakers, all patched and managed from the cloud. And Microsoft are actually making more and more experiences around these for the typical individual user rather than a room. And that's in direct demand to customers wanting a dedicated touchscreen unit sitting at home, always on and ready to go. So that's a look through some of the hardware scenarios. And the most important takeaway here is there's hardware for each bracket of cost and each bracket of experience, from the dedicated endpoint that does audio, video, and sharing, down to a reasonable wired headset just to improve user experience. But all of these work natively with Teams, and all of these can offer a great experience for the home user. And being that they're going to be at home more and more now, I think it's worth investing in quality kit to maximize their experience. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand over to Alex, who's going to go through a bit in terms of what Microsoft can do here to help. There's some offers and some promotions going on. Alex?
Cheers, thanks Tom for that. I think it was a great overview. Lots of topical topics in terms of Teams and legal. As you mentioned, obviously it's a great opportunity for Microsoft at the moment in terms of Teams deployment. Quite recently we announced we were up to about 115 million users on average per day. But with that comes great responsibility, and I think we understand that we've got to help our customers on that journey, especially around some of the additional elements which may require some additional licensing. So as Tom mentioned, if you're licensed with full E5, then you'll have all those building blocks around compliance, audio conferencing, and telephony. However, if you're not and you're on the E3 license, then there may be some additional uplift. And we've got a couple of offers in play at the moment, which last to the end of January, which can help adopt some of those elements at no additional cost. So, no additional cost for one of them and some discounts on the other. So the first one is an offer we have around audio conferencing. So this is allowing the user to add the dial-in number at the bottom of the Teams invite to allow people to join in on the phone. You can also dial out and bring people into the Teams meeting. We've got an offer that will give those licenses to you for free. That runs until the end of January, and you'll have them free till the end of your enterprise agreement. So wherever that runs to, be it the end of next year or even into 2022 or 2023, you'll have them free to that point in time. There is a slight caveat around giving you these free licenses, which is what Microsoft has the right, reserves the right to take them back if the customer is not on 20% deployment of Teams meetings or usage of Teams meetings within the first 6 months of taking the deal out. And that's just to protect Microsoft from kind of giving these licenses, a customer taking them, and then having no real intention of using Teams meetings. What we tend to find actually is the metric is pretty much just a user running a Teams meeting once a month, and actually a lot of our law firms are already at this threshold already. So I don't think it's a reason to not look at the offer. And obviously we're keen to make sure that as many of our customers take advantage of this to help them accelerate their Teams meeting rollout. The second offer is not free, but we're looking at very aggressive discounts around the telephony piece. It's done on a case-by-case basis, so I recommend that you contact equivalent of myself or your account exec at Microsoft to talk a bit more about that. But depending where you are in your agreement and the number of users you have, we obviously want to support you as you may move away from traditional platforms such as Avaya or Cisco. And so we have kind of models which mean that we can absorb some of that cost within our licensing in terms of discounts and allow you to make that move a little bit more palatable moving forwards. The last offer is around Teams meeting rooms. So I'll put the link actually in the IM window in a second. But if you make the purchase of 2 Teams meeting rooms from various vendors, obviously Tom showed some of them a second ago, we have a service where we will actually come and help deploy those within your actual meeting room itself. It's part of our fast track service. And I'll put the link in so you can read more about that. I think why that's important is what we're seeing is that during these kind of lockdowns or the fact that not as many people are in the office, it's quite a good time to look at meeting rooms and how we maybe modernize them with some of the Teams meeting room kit that you have access to. So those are the 3 offers. The audio conferencing free, definitely look into that. Phone system, please contact us and ask us because we want to help you on that journey. And then the Teams meeting rooms deployment offer, which I'll put in the IM window. Thanks. Over to you, Paige.
Perfect, thanks, Alex. So just to sort of wrap up on how Teams is helping legal organisations, working with legal organisations on a day-to-day basis, like I do, there's a few topics that come up in pretty much every conversation we're having, and I know Tom has touched on some of this earlier in the call. So file management in Teams and SharePoint. So how can you report on what information is in Teams, what documents are in Teams, where they're being stored, who has access to them, are the policies the same in SharePoint as they are in Teams, etc. So using our Teamwork Analytics service, we are able to run these reports, make it really easy for you to be able to look and see all of that information, and see sort of documents within the team, how long haven't they been active for, etc. And therefore what action should be taken. We also often get asked about integration with iManage. There are integrations available, but what we would do is recommend you to speak to iManage themselves about these. There's a couple of different ways that you can integrate this with Teams, and it's looking to see if this is suitable for you. So they're probably the best people to go and speak to about that, but we can certainly help with those conversations if needed. The next sort of topic is definitely the external parties that Tom touched on. So who should you be allowing access to? Should you be controlling that within your team's environment? And then how do you run reports and see who has access to what information within your organisation? Should they still have access? Or should they be removed? So that's definitely one of the main topics of conversation we go through. Teams archiving, again, is a really big topic, making sure that Teams has the right teams within it, and that there's not hundreds of teams that are no longer required. If they should be archived, then how do we make sure that the owners are alerted to say that the team hasn't been active? Can they remove guests and can they archive it? So using our Teamwork Analytics service to push out automated bots there, and also just run reports on what teams haven't been used for a certain amount of time, and you can set that trigger point. So whether it be 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, we can work with you to define what point you need that to be triggered, and then the user will get bots to remind them. The owners of the teams will get bots to remind them that they need to go and archive that team. Teams owners is a big one. So how many owners should you have within a team? If someone's off, who takes responsibility? And just making sure that generally the owners are aware that they are in control of that team, making sure they pay attention to the bots when they receive them, regarding either archiving or if they need to add another owner, do they need to check the external parties list, etc. So making sure that you're able to track and manage how many owners there are in a team, and also how many teams have the same owner, because if a specific owner has access to hundreds of teams, how are they going to actively be able to manage what's happening within those teams? So being able to track that as well. Team sprawl and the IT overhead. So again, Tom touched on this earlier, but it's definitely an area of concern when speaking to law practices that I work with. So just how to make sure that there's not a massive overhead on IT, and put that onus back on to the users. So again, using things like the bots and create teams, make sure teams are set up correctly, that their life cycle is being managed properly, and that people are actually following the process. So taking it away from IT having to find people to deliver those roles internally. Calling and working from anywhere. So how can people swap from devices to make it really easy? Obviously, people are working from home, but potentially might need to pop out and do whatever they need to do. Specifically with lawyers, I know they're very busy people, and they want to be able to take calls from wherever they are, and they want that to be easy and seamless. So being able to transfer a call easily from working on a computer when you need to leave, literally just pressing a button and transferring it to your phone and carrying on that conversation. All of this is achievable natively with Microsoft Teams, and it's really easy and simple. So just making sure that that's delivered to the users and they're able to adopt that technology. Another thing that we get come up quite regularly is how should people be presenting in meetings. Obviously, typically, if you're presenting a meeting, you probably stand in front of a presentation, and it sort of gives you control and power within that meeting. So Microsoft have actually launched a feature that allows the presenter video to appear in front of the presentation. So it feels more like a face-to-face meeting, and it gives the presenter of that meeting a bit more control of the room. So having one platform for everything, really, just to touch on that, it really helps with productivity, makes it easier for people to find things, makes it easier for people to know where to communicate and how to communicate. So just having the one platform for everything. But the conversation we're having is, what's the best process to roll that out? Should it be in phases? What process should we be following? So we're more than happy to set up sessions with everyone that's on this call, and talk through our experience with legal, what other law practices are doing in terms of rolling that out, rolling that full platform out, and what phases we should be following to do so. And then Teams meetings. There's always a lot of questions about Teams meetings, and certainly one of the big things that comes up is with the recording of Teams meetings, and really good for law firms, is being able to skip using keywords to relevant parts of the meeting, where potentially you might need to go back to and revisit without having to go through the entire meeting end to end. You can just skip to the parts that you need to recap on, which saves a lot of time for busy lawyers. So that comes up quite a lot as well. Perfect, thank you, Tom. Just with a couple of minutes left, just to talk through some of the offers that I'll be following up with you all on. Microsoft Modality are a fast-track ready partner, which means we can give free advice and guidance to any of you that have 150 plus licenses of M365 E3 or above. So if you do have those licenses and you want to apply, just let me know, we can apply for that. And we're able to give you free advice and guidance. So that's not just on Teams, that could be on any of the Microsoft modalities. And then we've also got the funded workshops. So there's a number of Microsoft funded workshops that we're able to apply for. I'll follow up with each of you individually, each organisation, and let you know which ones you're eligible for. The security workshop includes a threat check, so that's a really good starting point. There's compliance workshops, secure remote work from anywhere, which is great for everything that's going on at the moment. Teams calling, which gives you some free access to some trial licenses as well. Teams meeting and endpoint management. So I will contact you with which workshops you're eligible for, and if you'd like to know more details, then we can set up a quick call. And we're also able to offer demos of the Create Team and Teamwork Analytics reporting, and we're also able to set up some trials there. So lastly, just to say we've got a large number of legal firms that we work with, and we've got some that have offered to be reference customers upon request. So on a one-on-one basis, we're more than happy to arrange customer references if you want to understand what other law firms are doing, how they're working, and what their experience has been. So I will follow up with you, but if you do need anything, my email's on the bottom of that slide. And just to say thank you for joining and spending your Monday morning with us, and I hope you have a good rest of the week. Perfect. Thank you, everyone.